Why don't we kick things off with introductions? So maybe starting with Tarek, talk a little bit about who you are, what your company does, and one thing that inspires you about your company's mission.
Sure. Thanks, Alyssa. Good to see you again. Hi, everyone. My name is Tarek. My company is Moharram Ventures. We're sort of set up as an idea factory to build concepts into reality. And one of our projects to do this is Truly Green Plastic, where we've proven it's possible to take the cannabis biomass, all the residual that's left over from the industry, and turn it into fully biodegradable plastic pellets, which we're really excited about. This is an important mission for me. This is a personally funded and internally funded project right now. And so I really believe in what we're doing because we're all consuming more microplastics each and every day in our food, in our air, in our water. And because of how we build Truly Green Plastic, which we'll talk about in a second, we're able to eliminate that need because we're still going to be using plastics for years to come. So excited to looking forward to chatting with everyone today.
Perfect. And James, how about we hear from you next?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. My name is James, and I'm a co-founder at Sana Packaging. We're a sustainable packaging brand that designs and develops cannabis packaging for a circular economy. In 2018, we launched our first plant-based hemp plastic cannabis packaging, and in 2019, we launched our first reclaimed ocean cannabis packaging. And with the help of our customers, we've already removed more than 55 tons of plastic waste from our oceans and used more than 54 tons of plant-based hemp plastic. And for reference, the average car weighs around 2 tons. And looking ahead to 2021, we're getting ready to launch our first closed loop cannabis packaging made from reclaimed polypropylene. And for reference here, polypropylene is the most commonly used material for cannabis packaging. So there's an abundance of polypropylene cannabis packaging waste out there. But looking at where we are now, we're a pretty small company. We currently have 6 products on the market, soon to be 8. We work with over 350 customers across North America, mostly in the US with a few up in Canada, as well as some US territories like Guam and Puerto Rico. And while the materials we use are what we're known for and what put us on the map, we're actually material agnostic because ultimately our goal in designing and developing cannabis packaging for a circular economy is to, 1, minimize waste and pollution, 2, keep products and materials in use, and 3, regenerate our natural systems. So from a strategic standpoint, a big part of that is addressing or trying to address the failures within our recycling, composting, and waste management systems, and leveraging our brand to try and affect broader systemic change within the cannabis industry. And really excited to be on this panel today. We've been big supporters of the Cannabis Sustainability Symposium for a number of years. So I'm excited to be here with, this awesome panel.
Great. And also fun fact for polypropylene has one of the lowest recovery rates for plastic. And I think we talked about it in our briefing call, but it's less than 1% in Colorado. So definitely an opportunity to aggregate our resources and upcycle our waste to make something a bit more sustainable. So, and on to Cole.
Good morning, everyone. Good to see you again, Alyssa. My name is Cole Gibbs. I'm the founder and CEO of Dama Distributing. We specialize in sustainable packaging specifically designed for the cannabis and hemp market. Everything we work with is either hemp plastics, glass, bamboo, recycled materials, tenon, steel. None of our products require commercial composting because, for one, it's not widely available across the US, and for 2, most commercial facilities won't take most bioplastics to be composted to begin with. So we try to stay away from that type of material altogether. Really, the other part of what we do is education. There's a lot of misinformation and greenwashing that's out there in the industry. There's a lot of buzzwords that companies like to use that have no meaning really or definition of what they actually mean. So, for example, the term biodegradable is used a lot in the cannabis industry when it comes to packaging and even when it comes to the waste products of the cannabis industry. The downside to that is biodegradable has no term and definition of how long it takes to biodegrade. So even nuclear waste is biodegradable given enough time. So education is a big part for us so that consumers actually know and understand exactly what they're buying, how to properly dispose of those said products, and they actually can feel good about purchasing the products and understand where they're coming from. They're sustainably sourced. We're using biomass from the hemp industry and the sugarcane industry to create a lot of our products. Our labels are made from tree-free stone. It's actually calcium carbonate, which is the byproduct of the masonry industry. So everything we try to do is make it a sustainable option. With everybody talking about the number 5 polypropylene plastic that's primarily used for most of all packaging in the cannabis industry, there's actually no regulation when it comes to the chemical BPA for that packaging in the cannabis industry. So they've removed BPA from a lot of the packaging, or I should say plastic packaging in the industry, but it's primarily the number 1 and number 2, which is used for water bottles and milk jugs. But when it comes to number 5, there is no regulation for that BPA chemical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's an interesting toxicity element too in all of this when it comes to both environmental and human health. And just for context on how I got here, I'm not in the cannabis industry, but I do lead a sustainable packaging collaborative. So I work with OSC2, which is a group of natural food companies who are trying to solve our industry's most pressing issues. And what we're working on within our collaborative is scaling market-driven, compostable, flexible packaging solutions. So it's a good complement here with the panel. Well, let's go into a little bit more detail when it comes to those materials, because I know I can certainly nerd out on some of the science behind it. So maybe we'll keep kind of going in this same order with the questions for you all. But yeah, tell us a little bit more about specific materials, structures, and current applications for the packaging that you all work with.
Sure. So yeah, I think the toxicity and the sort of downcycling impacts are really important for us to consider. That's why when we got into this space in the first place, we wanted to make sure that the plastics that we were producing aren't going to require any of these expensive processing facilities and so on. And we've designed our process accordingly. And so the basic idea is we're pulling the glucose out of the plant biomass and feeding it to certain types of bacteria. When the bacteria consume those sugars, they produce inside their systems the biodegradable plastic that we're making, and we extract it from them, and it comes out as pellets. And so, we don't need to mix it with fossil fuel plastics or with other types of filler materials. It's 100% pure biodegradable plastic that can be used to make a pen or a straw or a pre-roll tube, a press and twist medicine container. Right now, we're focused on higher rigidity materials, so things like a pen, a puffer, that sort of thing, maybe a Dixie cup. As time goes on, part of our intellectual property, which, as I've said, we've claimed at the international level, will be applied to making more flexible films, because I agree, Alyssa, that's another big space for us to get in food and beverage and in other industries. And so, lots of stuff to come down the line, and we're really excited about the feedback we've been receiving so far, for instance, from the American Chemical Society presentation we did in August.
Great.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, some of the materials we work with include plant-based hemp plastic and reclaimed ocean plastic. The plant-based hemp plastic we work with is technically a fiber-reinforced biocomposite. It's made from 30% micronized hemp hurd and 70% PLA. And we use bio-based binders as well, so the material is truly 100% plant-based. Regarding our reclaimed ocean plastic, we use a pure HDPE and number 2 recyclable. We source our reclaimed ocean plastic in partnership with OceanWorks, and one of the big value adds that they provide is that the verification that we're sourcing a pure and clean material. This is also an FDA food grade certified material. And while we work with other materials as well, like hemp paperboard, recycled glass, our plant-based and reclaimed ocean plastics kind of represent 2 different but complementary philosophies and approaches to the packaging and waste management problems that we're dealing with. So on the plant-based side of things, this is the direction we need to be moving in for single-use products like packaging. And we need to be using rapidly renewable and regenerative resources like hemp to make these materials. And on the reclaimed ocean plastic side of things, this addresses a huge problem that the world is trying to tackle, i.e. plastic waste in our oceans. And if we can create an end market for reclaimed ocean plastics and view them as a stranded resource, as well as creating a financial incentive to clean our oceans. That's pretty great. Obviously, it'll take a lot more than, companies like ours doing this. We need much bigger efforts here. And as I mentioned, we're material agnostic, and that's because ultimately we want to be making strides towards circularity, and we want to be able to use, what we believe are the best materials available. So staying material agnostic gives us the flexibility to pivot and use new and emerging materials as they become available on the market. Similar to the materials that Tarek is developing, I think, what he's working on is super cool. And to quickly address, trying to launch a closed loop cannabis packaging product. Unfortunately, polypropylene is the most commonly used material for cannabis packaging, and as it's been mentioned, has less than a 1% recycling rate. Globally, it's around 1%. In Colorado, I think it's a little lower. And a big part of that is there's not a good secondary market for polypropylene. So if we can collect spent cannabis packaging and remanufacture it in a closed loop system, thus reclaiming it and helping create a secondary market for it, that's just one more step in the direction towards circularity.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I touched on this a little bit in my opening presentation. We work with hemp plastics. That's probably our flagship product, is our hemp containers. They'll degrade in as little as 14 months if somebody were to throw them on the side of the road. Obviously, we don't want you to do that, but if that were to happen, you don't have to worry about it being there for hundreds of years. You can home compost them if you like as well. They can be commercially composted. Neither one of those is required. Technically, they can be recycled as a number 7 plastic, but again, that's one of those materials that has really no buyer for it in the industry, so it's sent to a landfill. One great thing is my dog eats them when I break them. They smell like sunflower seeds to me, but for her, she loves them. So they're all FDA approved, food grade, non-toxic materials, so you don't have to worry about leaching into your cannabis products when you're using those containers. Now, we also use glass, bamboo. We use tin and steel instead of aluminum for our products. The reason why is aluminum takes another chemical called bauxite to be mined to actually produce. Yes, about 75% of all aluminum is recycled and is still out there in the industry. The downside, other than that chemical that is needed to be produced, is most aluminum is not recycled back into its original form. So most beer cans are not made from recycled aluminum. That recycled aluminum goes to other things like car parts and airplane parts and building materials and things like that. So that's why we use tin and steel. About 85% of tin and steel is still out in the market being used. Since it's magnetic, it's easily pulled out of the recycling stream. And that's why when you're walking around, you don't see chunks of steel and aluminum laying around the ground, because there's a market for it. People actually receive money for recycling and returning those types of products. Whereas plastic, there is no market for recycled plastic for the most part. California's largest plastic recycler closed its doors last year and laid off 700 people because it couldn't make any money. So that isn't the answer either. With 9% plastic recycled worldwide, less than 1% of number 5 being recycled here in the state, it's not the answer. We're just going to continuously drown ourselves in single-use plastic. The only way to stop that problem is to stop using the single-use plastic to begin with. All the new recycling facilities that are out there, they're struggling. They can't make any money off this recycled material because virgin plastic is so much cheaper than recycled material is as well. So try to stay away from that. All the new refineries that are actually being built and scheduled to be built here in the US are only to meet our demand for plastic. We have more than enough fuel here in the US. We've actually gotten away from our dependency on the Middle East and found massive oil reserves here in the US. We don't need fuel. It's only for single-use plastic, and we have to stop this before this industry drowns itself just like every other industry has for the last 50 years.
Yeah, some pretty sobering thoughts. And I would say too, when we're looking at packaging, we're looking at a system that's been designed and optimized for efficiency and pricing and not necessarily considering the negative externalities associated with that resource use. So when you see those higher price points on packaging, it's truly more realistic in terms of what the actual cost is, from extraction to production to recovery. And, we often talk too about kind of a portfolio approach when it comes to sustainable packaging. And I think these three panelists completely embody that. We're hearing like different materials, different structures, different end of life claims. And ultimately, I think our shared goal is to move away from that single-use petroleum-based plastic. So this is a pretty daunting challenge. I'd love to hear about maybe some key resource partners that you work with. And James, I know we have some overlap with Recycle Colorado. I know, policy, consumer education, even sourcing waste from different like hemp and cannabis farmers in Colorado, I know presents opportunities for rural rejuvenation of local economies. So maybe speak a little bit to some of those core resource partners.
Sure. Yeah, I think as we've been seeing in this space, access to biomass, kind of isn't the issue. There's plenty of biomass that's out there. We've got letters of intent with a number of people already executed, and we're not at commercial scale yet. And so, certainly the demand is there to try and do something meaningful with these materials. So whether that's Life Tech Mexico or Hawkeye Hemp Industries or Diamond Hemp in Chile, and there's several others that we're in talks with right now. So. And then lots of folks downstream from us, because of course we're focused on producing the plastic pellets, not necessarily producing syringes or pens or what have you. And so I think you hit the nail on the head, Alyssa. I think whether James's team or Cole's team or both, and some others, we're starting to have some conversations. We're seeing kind of the opportunities that exist, because one of the big challenges we've been seeing in the space is this quest towards vertical integration. That's not my intent, is to kind of, chase headlong after being vertically integrated all within our own company. I think our best bet is to focus on making really excellent biodegradable plastic pellets in the form of truly green plastic, and then potentially partnering with some of the organizations on this panel and other organizations in the space so that we can do what we collectively need to do. I think, as an emerging industry, when we're going up against the big folks in fossil fuel, or if we were in telecom or the railroad companies, getting to vertical integration really early is kind of a pipe dream. And so I think by working together, we're going to be best served to do this, and it's going to make all of our organizations the most profitable. I mean, certainly, I love the idea of reclaiming ocean plastic, which is when we need to be doing that. I'd love to see it focus more on like longer term things like construction materials, where they're going to get locked away. And I think by all working together and figuring out how we can kind of satisfy different segments of the marketplace, it's going to become profitable for us all to run our businesses in the most sustainable way. And so I'm looking forward to being able to do that as we grow over the years.
Yeah, so one of the big resource partners that we're working with right now is Nextcycle Colorado. We're currently a part of their 2019-2020 cohort, and Nextcycle is a business incubator created by the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, designed to help improve end markets for recovered commodities and organic materials in Colorado. So basically, this program was created to help companies just like ours engage with local municipalities in an effort to create demand pools and end markets for these materials. And ultimately, a big piece of that too is helping companies like ours prepare to apply for grant funding in the local municipalities in which they operate to help execute on these different, end market projects. Another big resource partner that we've worked with is Recycle Colorado, which is an action-oriented and member-driven nonprofit that works on tangible, actionable, and measurable projects that are related to infrastructure and end markets. So my business partner, Ron, was a part of the work group that helped change the regulation here in Colorado so that we can actually collect and recycle spent cannabis packaging, because previously that's not something that was even possible. And, had we not been involved with this work group or currently with Nextcycle, we likely wouldn't be where we are now in terms of, wrapping our heads around what does it mean to launch a closed loop cannabis packaging product and make these steps towards circularity. We're also involved with NCIA, which is, as I'm sure you all know, the National Cannabis Industry Association. We're part of their packaging and labeling committee. And this is more forward looking, I guess, as opposed to these other things that I've mentioned that are more immediate and actionable. The NCIA's focus is on what federal legalization will look like. So it's not super focused on, things that are happening right now, but kind of paving the way for what things will be. So with that in mind, being on the packaging and labeling committee, it's trying to figure out what will cannabis packaging and labeling look like under federal legalization as opposed to these siloed state markets. And then there's also, tons of others that we work with that, I don't really have time to get into and also aren't necessarily specifically related to packaging. But some of those, out there in case you want to look them up, there are good resources for a variety of things in cannabis are Cultivation Classic, the Resource Innovation Institute, Smart Cannabis, and Cannabis for Black Lives. And, there's just a ton of resources out there. You just need to figure out, who is it that's working on similar things as you, that shares your values, that you can partner with.
Yeah, so we do have a couple of strategic partners that we work with primarily almost on a daily basis. One of our biggest ones, Amdec, they do all of our printing for us. They use water-based inks. They've been in business for almost 40 years now. Very big clients in the sports industry, so really high quality products when it comes to their print work. Our label manufacturer in California is one of the only carbon neutral print facilities in the entire country. They use water-based inks. Again, they use recycled materials and tree-free stock materials for the labels. We have new partners that we're actually working with outside of the US, in Australia, New Zealand. We've even started working with some people in Ireland and Canada for different projects outside of packaging into the, let's say, the food industry or the beauty and fashion industry. So we're trying to, yes, work on solving this problem right now in the packaging space, but we need to expand that. There's tons and tons of industries that use packaging on a daily basis that don't have any solutions there either. So we try to maybe help them switch over, maybe one or two, to get into this new sustainable packaging realm, because up until now, there really wasn't solutions to these problems, especially in the cannabis industry, because of the rules and regulations. Coca-Cola has been bouncing around sustainability and recycled plastics for decades. They just came out the other day and said they're supposed to have a 100% plant-based Coca-Cola bottle within the next 3 to 5 years. So a lot of people are starting to work into this industry, and I think as we grow, more and more industries and people will jump on board. Companies like Tarek's company that is providing these new materials that really will solve this problem going forward, because they're ocean degradable. They don't need any commercial facilities. If a bird eats it or a sea turtle or a dog eats it, it doesn't matter. It's all organic material. So we need more and more people to help us get to that point. And we can do that together by slowly moving this industry and working on the state level legislatively. We're working with Denver County and Boulder County to address single-use packaging in the cannabis industry, just like other industries have done with cutlery and straws and plastic bags.
Yeah, and there's a lot of opportunity for infrastructure improvements through a variety of policy avenues. And so in Colorado, we've definitely seen a lot of end market creation. We've seen material bans come before the appropriations committees. We've seen benchmarking studies to better understand the benefits of different types of materials. And I think too, I'm glad that you mentioned some of the legislative and advocacy work that you're doing, because when we think about sustainable design, it's not just source reduction. It's not just materials. If you're not finding ways to improve the infrastructure to accommodate material innovation, and if you aren't educating your consumers about it, it's going to be very difficult to close that loop. So for our next question, I think this is a little more of a consumer-facing element, but how do certifications and those end-of-life claims play into your packaging innovations? And maybe are there any things that you see trending that kind of consumers and your, I guess, purchasers are asking for?
Yeah, I think it's a really great opportunity for us right now, and also, coming along with that, a great risk. So, there's been lots more coverage, I suppose, around recycling and some of the shortcomings of that model, at least as traditionally deployed. And so we've got a really cool opportunity now to start focusing on, okay, well, what's the next thing? What's the certification that's really going to communicate accurately what we're doing or striving to do, and do that in a way that the consumer can understand? Because I think we have, with that opportunity in hand, we also have a risk, because the consumer, if we cry wolf too often as an industry, as polymer producers, distributors, manufacturers, et cetera, if we cry wolf too many times, the consumer is going to stop believing us. And so, not unlike with the recycling symbol, the greater extent to which we make claims that end up not panning out 5, 10, and so on years in the future, the consumer is just going to become disengaged, and that's not what we want, because they're our biggest resource right now. They're our allies, they're our advocates to talk to their elected representatives and say, hey, enough's enough. It's time for us to change how we're living and what we're doing. And so I think, we'll talk about this, I'm sure, later on, but, we're trying to do our best to influence public sector decision makers so that we can have some movement in this space. We're taking a look at working with ASTM International to build standards specifically for truly green plastic, because, and I thank Cole and James for the feedback. I think it's going to be new materials. We don't say, well, cars pollute, and so eliminate cars. We say, let's make better cars. We don't say, fuel is bad, and so let's eliminate, means of propulsion. We just say, let's make better engines, right? I think it's about developing better polymers and not simply eliminating them altogether.
Yeah, those are some really good points. And to also, touch on some things Cole's mentioned, is that as it specifically relates to certifications, is the same way that terms like biodegradable or compostable can be misleading, so can certifications. And I think, a particularly tricky one is things that are certified compostable. In the United States, there's about a 5% chance that you live somewhere that has access to any sort of commercial composting. And within that 5%, it's a significantly smaller portion that actually have access to a facility that can process things like bioplastics. So even, if you got a to-go coffee cup and you look at it at the bottom and it says, this is certified compostable, it's still probably going to end up going to landfill, which is a huge problem. And, specifically in terms of how certifications play into our packaging innovations, the big one that everyone in the cannabis industry has to deal with is the ASTM child resistant certification. And while regulations differ slightly in each state, that really just mostly affects who our customer is, not what our products need to be. We also see cannabis packaging moving in the direction of, once it goes federally regulated, of being things needing to be food grade certified or FDA certified. Currently, cannabis is in this interesting area where we don't need to meet certain regulations, but we see them coming. So, we're trying to prepare by starting to use food grade certified materials and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with what everyone's saying. There's just not enough real defined certifications or symbols when it comes to this issue. There's a lot of them out there. BPI is one of them. They're kind of a pay-to-play kind of certification, just like the ASTM certification. It's not cheap, but they're more known across all of North America, even outside the US. ASTM certifications work pretty much in almost any country. The downside of those certifications is it's hard for the consumer to understand. So like James was saying, just because it says it's compostable doesn't mean it's actually going to be composted. Just like the recycling symbols, just because it's recyclable doesn't mean it's getting recycled. So I think there needs to be a more streamlined 1 or 2, maybe 3 symbols for packaging when it comes to bioplastics and compostable materials, even paper, FSC certified paper. They all need to have clear-cut information so that the end consumer knows how to properly dispose of those materials. You'll probably have started to see on packaging that you get in the food industry and clothing industry, they actually put multiple recycling symbols on the packaging saying that the outside packaging is recyclable, the plastic bags on the inside is not. So they're trying to help separate that. The downside is when you go to recycle your material and it's a single stream, you throw everything in one bin. It's so disorganized. There are a handful of people trying to select what's good, what's not as it's coming down the line, and there's mountains and mountains of it just coming in every single day. So it doesn't really help either. There needs to be separated, like paper and glass can be recycled multiple times. Glass is infinitely recyclable. So why does that need to be mixed with the plastic that can't be recycled and there's no buyer for it? It just makes everything harder. So I think with the Cannabis Certification Council, I know they've been working on different certifications and terminology in the cannabis industry for organic, since we can't use that term in the cannabis industry. I think the same thing needs to happen when it comes to packaging, because this really is the final step for the sustainability equation. There's so much information on lighting and soil and HVAC systems and composting all of your biomass material. And then it comes to packaging, they're like, just throw it in plastic, it doesn't matter. So there really needs to now be a final solution. And I think working together to create all this, I think will solve that problem and get rid of all that confusion for the consumer and just make it easier for them, because we're a throwaway society, unfortunately. And it's harder to change somebody's habits than it is to change a product. So I think that's where we need to go.
Yeah, absolutely. The take, make, waste model is not really serving anyone at this point. And the label that Cole mentioned, I think, is the Green Blues How to Recycle and How to Compost labels, which are actually really cool. They're used a lot in food and beverage packaging right now, and kind of a leader in the labeling industry. But that, again, is like very much focused on recovery and not necessarily sourcing. So thinking about how it's actually a project we're working on with OSC2 of trying to adopt a more standard labeling system so consumers have a better awareness of what they're sourcing and what to do with it at the end of life. So we have about 10 minutes left of our panel, so I'll give you all 2 more questions, I think. Just to root us in reality, I love hearing the aspirations and the innovations and to see kind of where you're all going with your work, but what would you say are the biggest pain points that you're hitting in terms of scaling sustainable cannabis packaging? And maybe it's something too for the attendees to think about of how can we get outside of our silos and adopt a radical collaborative model where, we can address the shared pain points together.
I think, certainly stigma around the cannabis space is one. If I were to be making packaging for, cucumbers or, Viagra or something, because we're outside of the cannabis industry, there might be consumer hesitation. Certainly there will be industry hesitation to say, and you source the plastic from what again, right? That I think we need to sort of overcome that. And that's going to take time and science and relationship building. But I think that's one of the obstacles that, we've been seeing. Certainly it doesn't help when we have a fragmented regulatory environment. So, it'd be great if we had a national space in the United States as we do in Canada. Certainly we've been working with partners elsewhere in the world to kind of overcome this hurdle. And lots of other jurisdictions are kind of, I don't want to say falling like dominoes as if it's a bad thing, but this wave is really starting to build momentum. So it's a great opportunity for one of the strongest economies on the planet to dive in and put all of its energy behind this market before other players do, because that will be the trend.
I think one of the biggest pain points with all sustainable products is always, the end price to the consumer or to whoever your customer is. And so that's obviously something that we struggled with, definitely more early on than now, because our pricing is becoming more competitive as we scale due to a number of factors, such as, placing larger material orders with our suppliers or using larger mold cavitations on our tools, building stronger relationships with our partners. So, what used to cost us $100,000 to $200,000 in product development, is now dropping to the $25,000 to $50,000. So there's a lot to do with economies of scale and just getting these sustainable solutions to the point where they can compete. And early on for us personally, a big challenge was also finding a stable and consistent supplier for our hemp resin. That was really difficult. Now we're fortunate to be working with a network of suppliers, and we're running into less and less issues with consistency and stuff like that. But that I think is a challenge that's particular to using bio-based materials. And then I think a big one for cannabis packaging and sustainability is designing child-resistant packaging with sustainable materials, because it makes it so that you have to have thicker wall thicknesses around the locking mechanism. That could be the line between something being compostable or not compostable. And then, of course, on a more macro level, just dealing with all the broken systems we have to try and work with and change. So whether that's our recycling system, our composting system, or our waste management system. But it's also why I think cannabis presents such a unique opportunity, because it's a rapidly growing and emerging industry with lots of packaging needs, and there's an exceptionally high willingness to pay for these sustainable materials. But we also have an opportunity to try and implement circularity from the ground up as opposed to from the top down, because we're, as an industry, still building our best practices. And then lastly, I think another big challenge is just the messaging around sustainability. It's such a subjective term. I mean, we do our best to not use the term sustainable at all, but to use more concrete terms, whether it's circularity or plant-based, because if you live, for instance, in the Northeast, water maybe isn't necessarily a sustainability issue to you because there's tons of fresh water there. But if you live in the West, water is a huge sustainability issue. So these terms are so subjective and loose that I think trying to get a coherent message across to your customer base that really educates people is always going to be a challenge for folks like us that are trying to push a new narrative, use new materials, and affect broader systemic change.
Yeah. And we've actually done some consumer insight studies within our collaborative that show a lot of willingness to pay and understanding of a plant-based claim versus a compostable claim, tying back to that infrastructure piece. And I think also there's a unique opportunity because consumers are so inundated with all of these labels and claims and certifications that are on packaging that you don't have room for a new one. And so we have to find a way to, in the same way that consumers recognize non-GMO and organic for food, how can we create a uniform label or claim like that for packaging? So yeah, how about Cole? Why do you finish us off?
Yeah, I think obviously right now the biggest hurdle is price more than anything. Just like flat screen TVs, when they came out, they were way more expensive, thousands and thousands of dollars. A few people could afford to buy them. And then as time goes on, more and more people adopt it, technology advances, price of the material will come down, and we can start competing more directly with single-use plastic instead of being much, much higher. I think on the other side is, yes, there's mountains and millions of tons of biomass that are available in the hemp and cannabis space. I get calls all the time asking, hey, can you take 2 million pounds? Yes, but there needs to be that middleman in there as well too. It needs to be dried. It needs to be ground down to the right consistency. We need to have a consistent product as well too, across all the board, because one industrial hemp plant versus a CBD plant produce different lengths and fibers and strength material, and the amount of cellulose those plants produce is different from each strain. So there needs to be a little bit more consistency. Um, Even when it comes to wood products and the hemp paper and all of that, there still needs to be that middleman person between the farmer and the actual producer that is actually creating this raw material. And I think the best way to do that is government subsidies and allowing these farmers and these middlemen to create all of this usable material that we can actually do something with, so that people that are working on hemp wood or hemp paper or hemp plastics or what have you can go to these different manufacturers and say, oh yes, this we'll try this one. There's new hemp fabric companies that are coming out creating almost cotton-like material. So I think as that continues to grow, that'll also alleviate a lot of the initial cost of the product, because the material cost is going to keep coming down and down. So I think that'll definitely help.
Yeah. Well, and one thing that we found in our collaborative is trying to find opportunities for collective purchasing power. And so for folks who exist working within the same structure with the same barrier requirements, are there opportunities for them to meet like minimum order requirements, basically? So have any of you kind of seen an opportunity for that within your lines of work? Is there an opportunity for, especially since cannabis packaging is a little bit more uniform than like the food and beverage applications that I usually work with, is there opportunities to try to scale a market-driven solution through that lens?
Sorry, could you repeat the first half of the question?
Yeah, the first part of the question was a little bit contextual of, we work with material providers and try to find cost savings and avenues for collective purchasing power. So when folks can't meet an MOQ, how can we find 3 people who are working within a similar structure or similar material and see if there's opportunities there? And since the cannabis packaging is a bit more uniform in terms of your products, right? Have you seen any opportunities there as a way to drive a more market-driven solution?
Yeah, I think definitely, working with the other entities that are in the space right now, whether on the public side or the private side, is key for us. I mean, none of us are running organizations that are, 20 years old and on solid foundations. I think it's this industry is emerging, and so the better able we are to work with one another and find our little niches, the more successful this industry is going to be, because we might have one entity that tries to go on its own. But at this early stage, that might mean the failure of the whole space. And so I think, working together in a way that's sensible for everybody is important at this early stage, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to echo that. As a small sustainable packaging brand in, a rapidly growing space with lots of competition from larger packaging manufacturers and distributors that have no focus on sustainability whatsoever, we've been able to create a pretty robust network of, we refer to them as, sister partners, so kind of a degree closer than, a manufacturing partner or a supplier partner, but these are other packaging companies that we work with in the cannabis space to help offer broader solutions to our customers. So for instance, we do all of our hemp paperboard outer packaging. We do that in partnership with Hemp Press up in Eugene, Oregon. We source all of our glass jars in partnership with Tree Hugger Containers up in Northern California. So creating this network, knowing that we all have our own niche and specialty and things that we're focused on, but if we really want to scale up our solutions and stay laser focused on the specific problems we're trying to solve, we need this support network. And then also on the sourcing side of things, which I think is where the question started, For instance, we've been approached to help folks create other products using our materials that, aren't necessarily a brand fit for us. But if we can, help them facilitate the creation of these products, that allows us to place larger order. That helps us drive down our costs by placing a larger order, because we're helping another company facilitate a project using the same materials that we use that, just doesn't happen to be packaging. So we don't really have any interest in making that product ourselves.
Yeah, I agree. Sometimes it can be difficult to meet those minimum order quantities for different types of products. Some people can, some people can't. We're all still fairly new in this industry. The CBD and hemp space is fairly new. Cannabis has been around legally for about 10 years now, but it's still in its infancy. The new states that are coming online, if you look at their rules and regulations, like Vegas, Arizona, they're doing stuff that we did here in Colorado 5, 6, 7 years ago. So I think we all need to work towards that solution. But sometimes even in the CBD and hemp game, I do have clients that can only handle maybe 100 or 200 units just because they're starting out. They want to get their name out there, kind of thing. So we try to work with them the best we can, try to work with different partners, as well as trying to work with different farms across the country, because we can obviously ship CBD all over the country. So I know a farm that might be creating CBG, for example, in Kentucky. Well, I can say, hey, go check these guys out. Maybe they have extra that they're trying to get rid of if you're trying to save costs, instead of having it shipped all the way from Colorado to you guys. So I think as we grow and work together, I think that'll help solve that massive commercial scale problem. Yes, there are large companies that are in 20 different states. They have 50, 60 locations. And those big guys definitely need to join this fight as well. We definitely cannot do this by ourselves, selling 1,000 containers, 100 containers here and there. There's dispensaries that see 1,500 customers a day. So the only way we're going to do this is together and getting those big boys to jump on the board as well, so that we can eliminate this completely. And kind of what we've been talking about is there are benefits from switching over. Consumers are willing to pay more for it. Consumers are looking for this type of material and this type of packaging. There's huge sales and marketing benefits from showing that you are a sustainable company and you're using sustainable materials. So I think there are a lot of benefits that will come down the line as long as people can look past that initial cost increase.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we're coming on our final few minutes here. So a quick shout out. The next panel is the New Green Revolution keynote with Winona LaDuke. But for you three, I'd love for us to end with a quick call to action for the attendees today. So dive on in.
It might not be sexy in some ways to say, but I think it's just about, doing your homework. Take a look at what the existing recycling infrastructure looks like, the amount of time that it's been around, and its success rate. Get a sense for, if that's going to be the trend in the future, how much more ocean plastic we're going to see if a significant percentage of it doesn't get recycled and it ends up back out there. Talk to your elected representatives. That's an important piece of this puzzle. Understanding what it means to have fossil fuel plastics in the marketplace. And it's not just about having kind of unsightly visuals. It's about how they actually do fragment and we're consuming them. Really putting your muscle behind this issue is going to be our key to success. So knowledge is power. The more you know, the better off we're all going to be.
And building on that sentiment, as much as I think as it's flawed to put, the way the market works is it ends up putting a lot of responsibility on consumers to change things like this, which is, wildly unfair. But at the same time, another thing you can do is talk to your local cannabis retailers, ask them about sustainable packaging. Ask them if they source products from brands that have commitments to using sustainable packaging on top of, sustainable cultivation methods. Ask them if you live in a state where there's point of sale packaging. Ask them if their house products use sustainable packaging and why not. And then, just to, again, echo what Tarek was saying, do your homework. In your local municipality, what actually gets recycled, what doesn't get recycled. And kind of going back to, what Cole was saying earlier was, I grew up in Europe. And so when I moved to the States, the number one thing that blew my mind was single stream recycling, because I grew up having to separate everything. And, so here there's just not an awareness of what actually can and can't be reclaimed or recycled in your local area, because we just throw everything in the blue bin and call it a day.
Yeah, I agree with both you guys. Doing your own research is definitely key, because when you look into different packaging companies, let's say outside of the cannabis space, you look a little bit deeper into what their products are actually made out of, and they might not actually be as great as they make them out to be, which is unfortunate. And it's hard for the consumer to know that. And most people don't want to do research when it comes to cannabis packaging or packaging to begin with. It's not sexy or entertaining in any way, shape, or form. But I think more and more consumers are starting to understand the problem of microplastics, the waste that is being created. They see it when they go outside. Consumers have already worked on banning straws and cutlery and plastic bags all over the country and all over the world. New Zealand banned single-use plastics altogether. Southern Australia banned single-use plastics. England has banned 3 types of single-use plastics completely starting October 1st. So yes, for the consumer, it is unfortunate that the burden is kind of still on them. I think a lot of this needs to go back to the companies that are producing these types of plastic chemicals. It needs to be their problem, not the consumer's problem. Obviously, it hasn't been working. That's why only 9% is recycled. So I really think that this can be a solution for everybody. But yes, you do have to do a little bit of research. There's a lot of it out there, so you don't have to worry about hunting for it or trying to find out all this information about polymer structures and things like that. Greenpeace does a lot of great reports on plastic and recycling. They have 2 that just recently came out this year. They go over the different states, municipal waste facilities, and go state by state and tell you what plastic is recycled, how much is recycled. PEW just did a huge report going over different end of life of materials, how much money people are actually willing to pay for more sustainable options. People are looking for sustainable options. So there's a lot of information out there. There's TED Talks on nanoplastic, which is the new problem. Microplastics, eventually they just continuously break down into smaller and smaller pieces. And what they're finding is nanoplastics can actually pass through the skin and scales of fish, goes directly into their bloodstream. And now they're finding that can possibly happen to humans as well. So if you're putting on lotion, who knows, you're just rubbing nanoplastic into your skin. So this is a huge problem that we need to address. But I think together and collectively, we are slowly getting there, as long as more and more people are providing solutions for this plastic problem.
Yeah. In a nutshell, do your homework and vote with your dollars. So I just wanted to thank our 3 panelists today for their time and their expertise and their passion. And I'm excited to stay in touch so that we can stay up to date on the latest and greatest with you guys. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, Alyssa.
You guys.
Thanks for having us.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. It was great.